looking after my office and my butt by sending me their E7 Pro desk that save your favorite desk heights at a touch of a button. You don't have to crank anything. This thing just finds the height that you like and you can work. And their BS12 Pro chair that supports my posterior while I'm recording, well, this ad and all my shows. If you need great desks, especially ones that change heights or the best quality chairs, head on over to FlexiSpot today. Oh, morning everyone. Welcome to the Scoreboard. I am Jared Kimber and well, that was fun. Unless you're a batter, but who cares about batters? Am I right? On a subpar wicket at Newlands, South Africa decided to bat first and battle through to lunch, and they did not make it to lunch, which is absolutely spectacular. Mohammad Siraj did one of those opening spells that we occasionally see in Test cricket, usually that end tests, although perhaps in this case, not quite. Still a little bit left to be done from that point of view. Bumrah was silly enough to get plays and misses at the other end, by the way, completely ruining his figures. South Africa made 55, but the wicket was still helping when South Africa bowled. However, Ngidi struggled early on for rhythm, and Rabada had one overturned, so they couldn't quite have the same kind of impact. Rohit, Gill and Kohli did actually score some runs by being a little bit more aggressive, and the rest of the players combined gave 8 runs, which was all KL roll. That was because India lost 6 wickets for none after tea. There was a run out there as well, which was also kind of fun because this was already a spectacularly entertaining day. To watch two tailenders be upset with each other is nothing better. But to quote Ravi Shastri, if someone has gone around the corner for a dump, India has been bowled out for 153. If that doesn't sum up this day's play, I'm not sure what does. South Africa then limped to stumps, although considering everything else, it's probably more of a strong batting performance, a gangster limp perhaps. But there was at times, moments in this game where we were wondering if this might be the first test match ever decided on day one. It didn't quite get there in the end. It actually, it settled down, but South Africa still has a chance of losing by an innings. Just absolutely madness from beginning to end. We will talk about Siraj and a little bit about Kohli as well, but let's just start with this pitch because this pitch is absolutely fantastic. Oh, what's Muku done? Oh, Muku's gone crazy on me here. Let's start with the pitch. So, before today, these stats are not including today. Before today, first session of the first session of the first day's play, Newlands had the lowest average of anywhere in the world, right? 28.14. That means that for an opening batter, there is no worse place to actually go out and open the batting on the first ball of a match than at Newlands. But you can see Headingley's not that far behind, and the Oval's there, and Harare's there. So there's a few places that are not that far off. Of course, if we add in today's numbers, they lost about 2 runs off their average today in that first session. So it is notoriously a bad place to do that. South Africa knew that, of course. They are, very experienced here, and they know that what you try and do is try and get through that first day, and the pitch does, first session, I should say, and the pitch does even out. The problem was that they did not get through that first session. And so that was absolutely horrendous. And there's a couple of reasons for this, of course. I'll show you this tweet by Kartikeya. He talks about in Centurion, India took their 4th wicket off the 75th false shot. And in Cape Town, it came off the 21st false shot. That usually suggests that while there were more bad shots played, or more false shots played, I should say, in that first session today, that it was a little bit of luck. And so I wanted to dig a little bit deeper on this tweet. So this is Centurion. You can see here that a wicket in the first session fell every 7.3 mistakes by the batter. That's quite low. The global rate is up at 11.4, right? In this test, it was every 5.5 balls, meaning that basically double the amount of wickets fell in that first session than what you would normally expect for that many mistakes. And you can see I did look up South Africa as well. There's no difference in that first session. The first session of tests in general, you're expecting to lose a wicket for every, let's say, 11 plays and misses. They're not all going to be plays and misses, of course, but if you think about it that way. So if you're losing them at half that rate, that means that luck played a part. And if you think back to that first session, Dean Elgar dragged one back on, which was definitely a false shot, but could have gone anywhere, right? And Dezorzi got one from a full ball outside leg stump that he flicked through to the keeper. Again, that edge could have gone absolutely anywhere. So there was an element of luck to that first session. We'll get to the rest of the day. Don't worry, we're not stopping here, everyone. This is the average in the last 20 years. Well, years apparently, according to that. And this is today. So yeah, it's always been tough to bat in the first session at Newlands, but I think we could safely say that today is even an outlier within the toughest to bat first session wicket in the world. All right. This is the average in the whole test match, over the whole test match. You can see here that Sabina Park's actually in the last 20 years been the toughest place to bat in test cricket. Ridiculously tough to bat. And all the South African venues up here, right? It shows you why. You know, those two places, South Africa and West Indies, have certainly been the toughest to bat, and South Africa is incredible. But Newlands is not tough to bat in. Newlands is specifically tough to bat on in the first session of day one. So yes, it was an outlier because of the couple of lucky wickets and then the fact that every mistake South Africa made was capitalized on. But overall, we expect that, you know, a few early wickets at Cape Town, you then make a decent amount of total, and then for the rest of the test, it's actually a fairly good place to bat on. This is it all the way through, just to show you a little bit more. So you can see that is low. That's obviously now lower after today. We'll get to this in a moment, but you can see the rest of this is fairly even. And then what usually happens towards the end of test matches is the averages get a bit more sporadic. A little bit lower, of course, because it gets harder to bat on, but also there aren't as many innings that are played over here as well. But you can see quite an even batting surface. So day two, the batting average is around 31, which is about the normal at Cape Town, all the way through. There. Okay. This is this is today compared to the last 20 years of first days of at Cape Town. What I find remarkable about this is it's almost exactly the same pattern, right? It's slightly different, but it more or less matches up with what you normally expect at Cape Town, which is impossible to bat in the morning, gets a little bit easier in the afternoon. In the middle of the day, and then in the afternoon you lose a few more wickets. But that's an average of 34. Today we had an average of 10, right? But you do see that is a pattern that it did follow. The difference here is the extreme nature of it, right? If we can forgive this because there was a little bit of luck involved and a lot of those plays and misses were edges on other days when that wouldn't happen, or you get the inside edge onto the pad and it flicks up to short leg. How many of those do we see not going to those positions, right? In this session, this is when India made all the runs. As you can see, an average of 27 is actually, considering today, absolutely heroic. But that it usually does settle down a little bit, and then it gets harder to bat at the end. Some of this, of course, is the collapse of the tail from India, and the run out is also included in this, of course. But I think we could safely say that you know, all day this was completely under the average. And why I show you this specifically is when you are looking at whether a pitch is good or bad, you actually need to factor in how similar it is to other pitches that have been produced at that location. So it's if you've got a pitch that consistently gets, you know, ragging turn, and you have a test match which has incredible ragging turn, you want to compare it to other pitches on day one and go, okay, well, it usually spins quite a bit on day one. This time, there might have been a little bit of luck involved and all that sort of stuff. That's what really good pitch analysis should be. Sadly, from what I've heard from the ICC, they don't quite get into this level of detail, but hey, we can hope for that. But the reason that, of course, I show you this is that this is the ICC's page on pitch and outfield ratings. You can see they start with very good. I think we can rule that one out. We're not going to good either, are we? Below average over here, you can see... average, I should say. Then you've got unfit. I think very good, good, average, and unfit. I think we can say all of those are not true. It was not unfit, right? It wasn't dangerous to play on. It didn't look like it was a wicket that shouldn't host international cricket ever. You know, those are the kind of wickets where, you know, the ball's running along the ground or it bounces over people's head massively, or, you know, you can't play a normal cricket shot on. None of those were the case of today. So I think we'd rule out unfit, and it certainly wasn't average, right? So these three are gone, and this one is gone. So you've got below average and poor. You can't just judge a pitch on day one, especially as we've shown you with Cape Town, because we do know it can flatten out on those other days. I don't think it's going to, but we have to prepare ourselves for that. Below average, it certainly doesn't look below average at the moment. At the moment, it looks solidly poor, but let's see what happens on day two. And hey, let's go wild. Day three, if we even get that far as well. But at the moment, certainly a poor surface. And if it has the ability to still get to unfit, of course. If tomorrow it's impossible to bat on, the only thing that would lead the main thing that leads me to poor at the moment is the fact that India lost those 6 wickets with the older ball in the third session, which is a bit of I think that's an issue, right? If it does it with the new ball, you kind of have to say, well, the new ball sometimes will get things out of the surface that the older ball won't. That wasn't a new ball. And the only thing that would get it to unfit for me is that we saw the ball consistently bouncing higher than it should have been at times during the day. That obviously gets batters out and can hit batters as well and can be very, very dangerous. But when it's consistently higher, which it was for a good part of the day, you might say that's still a below average or a poor wicket. But within that, you would still have to suggest that it is, what's the best way of putting it? That it's, a normal cricket thing. Like the whacker always bounces higher than normal, right? You wouldn't say that makes it below average or poor. It's the inconsistency. Where the real inconsistency came in for me was specifically when South Africa were batting, we started to see balls shoot low. If you've got on day one balls going high and balls going low, outside of the first session, where sometimes they can do that while the pitch settles down at the start of the game, but if you have it towards the end of that first day, that suggests that the wicket is certainly poor, which no one's going to argue me on, but could veer towards unfit. So if tomorrow we have shooters and we have balls hitting batters, then that's an unfit pitch at that point. But I don't think it's anywhere near that. We only saw a couple of balls keep low so far. Certainly poor, below average. You'd be fighting your way to get up to below average from where we are at the moment, if we're being very, very honest there. And what does all that mean? Well, that means that we almost had the most wickets ever taken on a day of Test match cricket. I think it might have been the equal most on the first day, I think someone said, or maybe I was in South Africa. But I looked up the whole thing overall here. So you've got 1888. That was before we had liquid manure. So that one probably unlikely to be beaten. 1902. Pitches are starting to get better by 1902. However, still, things can happen. I wonder if 1902, though, was in South Africa. That might have been on a matting pitch. Anyway, 1896, liquid manure. I should say that's in the middle of the liquid manure. So pitches are just... they're a little bit better in this generation than they were in the 1880s. Then you've got 2018, so obviously current day, and 2011. So of current day, of cricket after World War I, when we know that the wickets are a lot better, this is the equal, second most wickets ever in a day. The one thing I would argue here is that this was incredibly entertaining, and that I actually want them to have a third innings each on this wicket just to keep it all going for us. But they won't do that. Political correctness gone mad. Remember, if you want to comment, especially if you want me to answer a question of yours, the best way to do this is via the super chats. But that is the pitch and the wicket and the Cape Town nature gone. So let's move on to Siraj. It was funny. Let's not move beyond Siraj. Let's go back to Siraj. It was funny that in the last test match, there was some talk. It just shows you how quickly these things can change and how people look at it. This is his first-class bowling average by team. So you can see that for Hyderabad, he's at 23, and for India A, he's 21. I think I said during the last test match that his test record was a little bit higher than I thought it should be. This is kind of what I was alluding to. I mean, some of this is also the eye test. I've seen him bowl so well on so many different occasions. I do think we're seeing with Siraj that because he's such a natural wicket taker and he has so many natural skills in his favor, that it might be harder for him to replicate them consistently. But we've now seen, 5, 6 major sprees across ODI cricket and Test cricket, where he's basically unplayable. His best ball, when he's bowling at his best, is just so hard for anyone to be able to handle. And, you know, we haven't seen as much of that in Test cricket at the moment. So this was his top bowling performances in Test. So he took the 5 for 60 in the Port of Spain. So quite a poor batting lineup for that one. Obviously, the Gabba one, again, slightly different situation. You know, I would expect to see more, if he plays over a long period of time, more sprees like this based on what we've seen in ODI cricket. So, you know, might have to wait a little while before that comes across into Test match cricket. But he's still quite very new, you know, all things considered, when you look at the fact that he hasn't played as much red ball cricket at a young age as many other players would have. Okay, so this is Siraj in his since his debut. So you can see that he's averaged 28.37. The global average in that time is 29.42. This is where I think he should be better. I think he should probably be a little bit lower. And you can see that in the matches he's played, the average is 28.64. So he's not doing massively better. Well, he's doing almost identically to other bowlers in the games that he plays. You know, days like today will certainly help that. But I think he'd need a few more of those at the moment. But days like today prove that he has that in him. I suppose it's the best way of looking at that. And this is something that Cheyenne was looking at, which I think is quite interesting. That when he has that, you know, gun strike bowler at the other end, he hasn't done as much. Now, maybe that is Bumrah taking some of his wickets away, although sadly for Bumrah, couldn't take many of them away today. But you can see without Bumrah, it's 25.59, which is quite interesting. And then you've got his bowling average by venue. So you can see absolutely tore up the West Indies. Didn't work as well in England. I think that's a good average for Australia. And, you know, you take that in Bangladesh, and then you got home and South Africa as well. So he kind of travels. This is interesting. I want to see him in New Zealand as well. Generally, that will give you a good idea. But I do think he is a better bowler than that particular mark. And because of the sideways movements that he gets, I think he should be successful eventually in England. And you can just see here, he did have this period where I think people started to question him a little bit more after, let's be honest, a fairly fantastic beginning. You know, what is he? If you're after 10 test matches averaging 27, and he's working his way back there a little bit, although, you know, I was going to say he could still have a bad second innings, but he could continue to cash in on the second innings of this particular match. And we just wanted to have a look as well at just the amount of overs he's bowled for India. I think we looked at this, and he's got the 6th most overs in international cricket since he's made his debut. So there's a few guys ahead of him. But for India, certainly, you know, Bumrah and Shami have been injured so much. You know, obviously, Shardul is an all-rounder. And you can see that the other guys here, you know, you've got younger guys coming through in this area. You've got a couple of senior bowlers on their way out here, and then the all-rounder as well. So he has had quite a heavy load so far. So I suppose you could say that they're fast-tracking his development. But, yeah, I do think that there is a sense of explosion within his bowling that can give us days like today. So it'll be interesting to see if he can manage that a few more times. And now let us get on to Virat Kohli. So this is the percentage of runs scored by players today. So Kohli scored 17% of the runs. You got Rohit, Shubman Gill, and then Aiden Markram, who I also thought batted really, really well. I thought maybe these two were the most interesting. I love the way that Rohit went for the bowling, and I suppose Shubman as well. But it does tell you, I think it's a shame for Virat he didn't end up not out, because this is the kind of innings that if you end up not out, I think there's one, I think Rahul Dravid was not out 27 in a match in India in South Africa, where India were bowled out for like 61, and you're like, oh well, you give him that. Whereas unfortunately for Virat being dismissed, but it does show you that he certainly looks like a different level, and the fact that these three guys had a good strike rate I think someone said in our Discord chat at one stage, there's just no point defending on this wicket. And I think that's probably fair, very fair, because of that extra bounce. Even if the lateral movement doesn't beat you, it's the ability to get a glove or that shoulder of the bat is always there. So going back hard at players, at the bowlers, certainly makes a lot of sense. But as I said, I thought Markram batted quite well there as well. So this is Virat Kohli's batting average in South Africa compared to the rest. So he's averaging 51.7. This is the rest of the Indian top order. What's that coming up for me? Oh, there it is. So 24. So he's double his teammates, which is a remarkable record. And then you've got his average, the average of the South African batters. So he's also out batting the South African batters. I'm trying to think. He's had some strong South African batting lineups and also some weak ones in that time. But even so, this is quite a record from an away player. I think if you look at his record in Australia and South Africa, there's just and also under day-night conditions in ODI cricket, there's no doubt he just likes the ball coming on a little bit quicker compared to most players. So there is a technical element to this. Also, like that for some reason here, we've lost the bail, despite the fact that the ball hasn't come here. Anyway, that's an aside that we don't need to have a look at. But I think this is just a fantastic record, all things considered. And this is him by tour, 2021-22, the only outlier on strike rate. So you can see down here, still averaged. Oh yeah, so he still averaged over 40. I was going to say he doesn't average over 40, but he does. Still average over 40 in that particular one. So this looks like a bad series, but it's a better series than most players have when they go to South Africa, because it's, you lose your wickets so low, especially for an Asian player. You then have the 2017-18, almost averaging 50 with a healthy strike rate here. Averaging 50 with a healthy strike rate so far in this tour, of which he might have one more innings left. And of course, the average of 68 with a decent strike rate back in 13-14. Really is a very, very good one. This one, he got very, very little help from other players at all. This one was obviously on debut in South Africa. So yeah, and I think what I've liked about the way he's played in this time is he's really looked to punish the bowlers and not let them settle when bowling to him, right? So really, really interesting. And this is Asian batters in South Africa. It's not a good place for Asian batters to go. Australia is faster and gets more bounce, but South Africa adds the lateral movement in. So even when it's a little bit slower, and then on top of that, they are just better pitches for bowling than Australia is as well. If you look at the overall averages, like even South African batters struggle at times. So you've got Kohli averaging over 50. Tendulkar had a fantastic record here. You can see Kumar is the best of the non-Indians. So there's quite a few Indian players here who've been quite handy. And then you've got the Yunus Khan down here. It's certainly not a place for the Pakistani players and even the Sri Lankans. But my man, Dhananjay De Silva, that's not the point of this. I'm not showing you this to show you this, but it does show you just how fantastic Virat Kohli has been when in South Africa and how he is on a different level. But we focus on him because there was one bit of batting today as well. I thought Nandre Berger bowled well, but we talked about him quite a lot in the last test. But just a fantastically weird day of cricket. I'm going to take a break, and then at the end of this break, I will come back with any questions. If you do have a super chat, that is the way to go. But that is the end of the scoreboard part of the show, and now we'll do a little bit of Q&A here with Jared Kimber on the scoreboard. Remember that cricket is a funny game. 100 years before we protected our heads, players looked after their groin. So don't be as stupid as old cricketers. Protect your computer. NordVPN is the protection I use when facing cyber short balls or when the rights issue tried to dismiss me. NordVPN will help you get through the straight bat of any GEO blocks so you can watch all the cricket you want. If you need your pitch changed, well, NordVPN can doctor any surface to a new location so your IP address is set up for you to win. Want to buy an associate cricket shirt from a place that won't ship to your country? Select NordVPN. Want to watch a game on a free stream in another hemisphere? Give NordVPN the ball. or if you just want to watch a clip on social media that the cricket board won't allow, promote NordVPN to pinch it. So if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a cricketer protects their nether region with NordVPN today. All right, no super chats, but quite a few just normal messages. So if anyone wants to drop a super chat in, feel free. But let's start with Christopher, who says the real question is, will we make it to tea tomorrow? Tea tomorrow. So they're 3 wickets down. So if they lose an average of a wicket every, let's say, 22 runs, well, let's say 20 runs to make it easier for my brain. What's that about? 20? No. No, I don't think so. I think, based on what we've seen, even if it flattens out compared to today, it probably shouldn't flatten out to normal levels. So if you get a wicket every 20 or so runs, it shouldn't make it to tea tomorrow. I will say this, and I think someone else might have put this in the comments. It might have been I didn't see who it was, but thank you to everyone who's commented as well, even the ones I'm not mentioning. But this is a wicket where occasionally weird things can happen. So the 2011 test. Yeah, that was one I wasn't at. Yeah, 2011 test, Australia, South Africa. You had the situation where South Africa collapsed from a good position, then Australia collapsed even less, and then South Africa chased a really good score on the last day. So Cape Town can be weird sometimes, but it is genuinely first day, first session, then fairly normal all the way through. And then drops off, and then it deteriorates a little bit at the end. Not massively, but a little bit towards the end. So if we do that and it flattens out, I don't think flattening out on this wicket, though, is going to mean averaging more than 20 runs per wicket, and they're already 3 wickets down, and they're a little bit behind. So you would imagine that is the case. But I don't want to be able to predict what is going to happen, because no one would have predicted kind of anything that happened today, right? So I don't know if this is a normal Cape Town wicket on steroids, or if this is something else going on. And I know the groundsman had a lot of trouble with the weather coming in, and did talk about the fact that he wasn't particularly happy with the wicket, and he was right. Prakash says, you were the only person who talked about the pitch. No, they certainly talked about it on the TV. I haven't read anyone else, Prakash, so I don't know about that. But I saw Mark Nicholas said it was a subpar wicket. I don't know if any of the other commentators did. They didn't focus on wicket a little bit, but they took Elgar, I think it was just Elgar. I don't think any Indians were there. But they took Elgar through the dismissals and showed all the different wickets. And Elgar talked about the inconsistency of the bounce towards the end of the day as well. So, yeah, I've been literally working, so I don't know if anyone else has. Someone tweeted going, this wicket should be penalised. I mean, this wicket's going to be penalised. Even if it flattened out tomorrow, I don't think it could possibly flatten out enough to overcome what happened on day one. So unless it flattens out to being like 40 runs per wicket tomorrow, which I just don't see, and which would be weird at Cape Town anyway, which is not a normal average at Cape Town. Anyway, I just can't see how you'd be in any situation where you would think that this is a I don't think how it would be possible for this to be a situation where this wicket doesn't get fined. This wicket is going to get fined. They won't factor in the flukiness of some of the early wickets, or the fact that Newlands quite often has a lot of early wickets. And they probably won't even factor in the run-outs later on. But if you just looked at CricViz, and I didn't see any CricViz numbers, but if you look at CricViz numbers and Hawkeye numbers, my guess is that this would be a subpar wicket, which is how they should be looking at these wickets. It'll be interesting if they find it, if Cricket South Africa actually question it. That would be the more interesting one. Rohan says, stupid Dave cricket, some really fluky stuff in both innings. Yeah, I mean, I talked about that a little bit at the top, but I do want to point that out. Like, this is not a situation where the wicket alone was the reason we saw 23 wickets today. I thought you have a look at Jadeja's wicket, for instance, which is a good ball and a tricky one, but you could see his weight coming on the front foot, and that ball was probably one that you should go on the back foot to. So there was a few times when there was batting error involved. There was a few times when there was a fluky nature to it. You should not have had 10 wickets in that first session, for instance. You then had the collapse, and sometimes when you have that sort of a collapse, teams just get on a bit of a roll, and that what was it, 4 wickets in 7 balls or whatever it was at that point. It didn't settle down that much more after that, but when you get on those sorts of rolls, all those sorts of things happen. I kind of feel like you almost need to take the wickets away from it, and what really the two things that people should be looking at when they're judging this kind of a surface is the consistency of what happened. Were random balls pinging around, or was it happening consistently? Because those are two different things. The safety, obviously. I said 2 things, now I'm on 3 things already. But then also the inconsistency. So the fact that we had high bounce and low bounce is a really, really bad sign on a wicket like that. And so when they're factoring it in, they should be looking at the CricViz data, or the Hawkeye data, I should say. And the other thing they should factor in is the false shot data, right? Because I didn't look at India's false shot data, but there's no doubt with South Africa's there was an element of more wickets than you would expect normally. Alexander says, one thing is for sure, Elgar's last game will be a memorable one, and not just for him. Yeah, I kind of felt a bit bad. It was nice that the ground stopped and, looked at him. But yeah, his last day in Test cricket, and he's batted twice. Absolutely remarkable. It was funny. He said afterwards that, South Africa has to look at it. Maybe the pitches are too in favour of bowlers, which is interesting because he actually has a really good record in South Africa, although lost a couple off that average today, and has managed to handle that as well as almost anyone else. He's really struggled away from home. But also interesting because you've got a guy leaving the game going, this isn't like a batter worrying about his next innings, right? And he's saying, look, quite clearly our wickets have gone too far. And this is the kind of wicket that I've talked about in India as well, where it brings in a sense of randomness into the results, right? And South Africa already has a sense of randomness because they don't have strong batting. So it's like you playing South Africa at home, in their home at the moment. You could lose a series where you're the better team, and smash them in a series just as easily, just based on toss and when you go into bat and the flukiness. Because if India had gone into bat today, a similar thing could happen to them. I don't think they would have been bowled out for 55, but they may have been bowled out for 100. And then South Africa would have batted throughout the better session. Like those sorts of things are a part of Test cricket, and you have to overcome them. But they're being amped up on some of these wickets. Rohan, is Siraj following a broad-like trajectory? One ridiculous spell after a number of normal spells. I think that both of their best balls are very close to being unplayable. And I think that neither of them are natural technician bowlers. So I think what that means is a lot of things have to align for them for everything to work. And when it does align, it's not particularly easy to play them. So they're very different, obviously. So they're not similar kinds of bowlers, height-wise and movement-wise and swing-wise and these sorts of things. But they are very similar in that when it's right, there's not much you can do at the other end. So there's a big difference between that and, say, Richard Hadley or Jimmy Anderson or Vernon Philander, right? Who, even on their worst day, they should be there and thereabouts, and you have to watch them and everything else. Whereas I do think on Siraj and Broad's worst day, you probably can cash in a little bit, or at the least, you're not going to look like getting wickets to them. So I think in that way, I would have Siraj as a potential spree bowler based on what we've seen so far in one-day cricket and when he's at his absolute best in tests. Satya says, I know that you aren't a groundsman, although I did train to be one, but never actually got around to doing the job. But mechanically, how does a very grassy pitch flatten over the course of a day or two, or even a session? Clementine looks adorable in the ad. She does. Why do wickets flatten? Okay, so it's the amount of times, obviously, they continue to be rolled. But also you have to, in order to keep a pitch fresh for the 5th day, you have to water it a certain amount at the start of the game. So you need to keep a little bit more grass on it and keep it a little bit more moist. When it is moist, the ball usually does more. That moisture dissipates over the period of that game. The other thing that you have is that live grass becomes dead grass, right? Because especially when the sun bakes on it. So when it's live, again, which is why balls react more on green surfaces than they do on brown surfaces, is because the green nature allows that. South Africa is a little bit different as well. Especially from a lot of the other Western countries in the way that their wickets act to sun. Sometimes the sun can do the opposite in South Africa, where it actually cracks the surface open. And sometimes bowling under the sun can be quite handy in South Africa, whereas generally in Australia or West Indies, and certainly England and New Zealand, you prefer to bowl. When there's clouds, and certainly not. The middle session usually ends up being the session with the least amount of moisture, right? So yeah, it's about moisture as much as anything else. But essentially, it's a living surface, Satya, and that the surface starts to die off as the test match goes longer overall. Says Newlands is considered to be one of the to be slower than Wanderers or Centurion, making it slightly easier for batting. What explains the struggles for batters today? Yeah, so it is. It does have lateral movement though, but it can be a little bit slow. It's not the slowest though. I would say Burka. Didn't get my in there right. Burka. No, now I'm clicking. I think I got it right at one stage, but I could be wrong. I think that is probably, of the main wickets, maybe one of the maybe the slowest one. What made it today? There was a little bit more pace in the wicket. I think Dean Elgar said that the ball did come through. So what you had is lateral movement, which Cape Town does get. You got steepling bounce at times, which was a little bit more of a surprise. You got inconsistent bounce as well, and at pace. And that combination is quite lethal. Realistic, I mean, as we saw, but it is quite lethal, and you couldn't expect any batter to be completely on top of a situation like that. It's very, very hard to be able to bat on those kinds of conditions and the way that you did. So it makes perfect sense that we saw what we saw. Pratik comes in with a super chat. Bumrah is Anderson and Siraj is Broad. I mean, no, because Anderson is a shorter bowler who relies on high skill and swing and wobble ball. Bumrah is a taller bowler who is quicker than Anderson. Not quite as accurate, although not far off as accurate. And is probably a little bit more experimental than Anderson within a spell than Anderson. And Siraj is obviously shorter. But if you're looking at the sort of types of wicket takers they are, Bumrah is very rarely going to go wrong, right? Because he experiments, he will occasionally probably bowl a spell where he bowls a little bit too full or a little bit too short or a little bit too wide. More so than, say, someone like Cummins will, who doesn't experiment as much. And certainly, Anderson will usually just stick to his spots. So Bumrah is a little bit different than Anderson from that point of view, but there's very little that can go wrong with Bumrah outside of injury. Like, he should be there and thereabouts most of the time. And, obviously, like Anderson, very, very smart. Siraj and Broad aren't similar in height, and they certainly aren't similar in their outlook. Broad is not when he's bowling as much, but, Broad is constantly tinkering and is a bit of an experimenter from that point of view, whereas Siraj is a little bit someone who just has a natural ball. That wobble ball that he has is just unplayable. The pace, the accuracy, the fact it can hit the stumps and take your outside edge and all those sorts of things. But I think what you have in Siraj is very similar to Broad when you look at just the way that they can cluster wickets together, because when their best ball is being bowled, it's very hard to not be dismissed off it. Whereas Anderson and Bumrah, their best balls are fantastic, but maybe you can play and miss at them a little bit more, or you can, because there's so many of them, you kind of get a little bit more used to them. I don't know if I'm explaining that perfectly, but there's a big difference between, the sort of spree bowler and wicket taker. So, I think the best one in history is probably Murali versus Warne, when Warne took his wickets one at a time, and Murali took his wickets in big clumps, and that's because Murali's stock ball was probably even better than Warne's. Warne had to think you out a little bit more, and Brian Lara talks about this brilliantly, the difference between the two. Warne was always on top of you, whereas Murali, once you got to you were batting for a certain amount of time, you felt like you had him in your pocket a little bit and you could score off him. Thank you for the super chat, Pratik. I'll take another quick break, and then after the break, we'll see if there is anything else in the chat. I'm Jared Kimber. This is the Scoreboard. We're here for every day of this test. We might be here for 2 days.
If you watch this channel, you'll love us on Main, where we do deep dives into the greatest cricket stories every week at Good Areas. How did Virat Kohli play that shot? What is so weird about Neil Wagner? And explaining the incredible misery of being a New Zealand opening batter. Visit our Good Areas site today. Want to show the world that you not only love cricket, but that you know the game deeply? Well, you need a Bodyline t-shirt. In fact, at Bodyline t-shirts, you can actually buy a t-shirt about Bodyline, but also tees inspired by the greatest players in our game. Head to Bodyline t-shirts today.
All right, just the last couple of questions, and then we will head off. Here we are. Where are we, Pratik? Udit says, would you mind making a video on Pat Cummins? It's been on my list for ages. I just haven't really got around to it. He's back in form again, though, now. So perhaps it will be something that I'll do. But yeah, it's certainly been on the list, but just haven't gotten around to it. I think I started writing a draft like 3 years ago. It just, I probably have like 80 drafts. Or 80 ideas, I should say, some of which are drafts. So yeah, we get around to them when we can. Jotzi says, do you think Shreyas Iyer is test material in centre countries? Yeah, I think anyone with his batting talent can work it out. Whether he does or not is a huge thing. I do think he's missing a couple of really important years in his development, but I certainly wouldn't judge him on this surface. Otherwise, you'd be judging everyone, right? If you're asking me if he has the talent to do it, yes. If you're asking me if he will do it, I mean, we just don't know. He's going to need more time in those conditions. The same as if you were asking me if Ollie Pope's ever going to work out how to bat in Asia, right? It's exactly the same question. But it says, Australia doesn't seem to be producing as many talents as India or South Africa. Domestically, is there a reason for it? I mean, some of this is cyclic, right? Or cyclical. I would say Australia at the moment is producing more all-around talent than they ever have before, right? So for generations, no all-rounders. Shane Watson, Slasher. Is it Slasher? Who's the last all-rounder before him? Max Walker, I suppose. But they're virtually no all-rounders, right? And then, I don't mean Slasher, do I mean the other guy? But I'll remember that later. And then suddenly all-rounders everywhere, okay? So Hardy, Green, and Mitch Marsh all at the same time would suggest that they're not having trouble finding talent. I think Jai Richardson is massively talented. I think, in Lance Morris and Spencer, they certainly have incredible fast bowling options coming through. I would say that Todd Murphy is incredibly talented. That's a lot of younger talented players I've just talked about in the space of a little while. They're not producing batters at the moment. I wonder how much that is related to the changing the point system and the Dukes balls and a few of the different things that they've tried in first class cricket in Australia over the last couple of years. Or I wonder how much of it is they're just not producing batters. That I can't tell you. But yeah, I don't think bowling and bowling, spin, and all rounders are an issue. Kingfisher says, South Africa, SA20 is going to be really exciting. Look at these conditions. I would love it if they played it on these pitches. And Slummy Nathan says, is Virat in 2024 the best batter amongst the Fab Four? I I mean, maybe. To be honest, it wasn't that long ago. He wasn't probably. So he might be, if you're looking at literally current day form. But I would have, and I suppose, I mean, you say best batter here. I usually think that means test batter, but I suppose if you look at one day form, he might have the others covered. But in test cricket, over the last, year and a half, he probably wouldn't, right? I would have thought there was quite a few. There's only 4 of them. I mean, Williamson's been out injured for quite a while as well. But best overall batter, perhaps, at the moment. Yeah. I think he's batted really well in South Africa so far. Been really, really impressed with him. Smith has not been particularly bad either of the bits I've seen of him. Doesn't quite still look like the Smith of old. But, there's a lot of talk about Smith and his average. He still had quite a few years in the last couple of seasons where he's averaged over 50. We're just used to him averaging over 60 and 70, right? So there is a bit there. And that's it. No more super chats. So we're done there. Thank you very much. Oh, no, that's the wrong message. There we go. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll be back tomorrow. It will probably be the last one. It might be a short show. We'll give it a go. But if you ask questions, I'll try and answer them. But big thanks to everyone who chipped in today. I know I didn't get to everyone's message, but I think Alexander was there. Ayush, Zappy. Did I do a message from a Zappy? I feel like I should have. Charles was there as well. Heaps of different people turning in on the chat as always. I did Rohan, didn't I? So thank you very much to everyone. We will be back again at the close of play tomorrow. And I don't think I will get a chance to do the video on today's play, but I would love to go into how remarkable today's play was, but I don't think I'll get to do the big video on that. So Scoreboard will have to do, and I will see you again next time. I am Jared Kimber, and thank you again for all of your support. I'm trying to find the Flexi Spot ad just because I really like it. And I'll see you tomorrow. A lot of people complain that I'm not a former cricketer and so that I don't really know the game. Well, you know what they can't claim? That I don't know desks. I've been using desks for years. I'm a collector of desks, old and new, and I'm sitting on a new one right now. I'm the Don Bradman of sitting at desks. So when I tell you that the E7 Pro next generation height adjustable desk from FlexiSpot is legit, this is like Michael Jordan talking to you about sneakers. This desk holds 160 kilograms. It is as stable as anything I've ever seen, and it has under-desk cable management. But really, the main skill here is that this desk rises and falls at the push of a button, and it moves super quick. And it has so many settings that remember your favorite heights. It really does it all. And I could not recommend the E7 Pro from FlexiSpot anymore, even though I am currently sitting on one of FlexiSpot's BS12 Pro multifunctional, adjustable, upgraded fabric ergonomic chairs. My butt and computer have never been happier than when using one of FlexiSpot's products. So get over to their page right